Hello, welcome to Life Made Easier. I'm Dr. Tiffany Hunter, and this is a podcast about how energy, emotion, and awareness shape the way that we live. Every week, we're going to be talking about energy and healing and consciousness and understanding how those things can help your relationships, your stress, your decision making, and all the things that can make your life easier.
I'm Dr. Karen James, a psychologist and energy healer in the UK. And in today's episode, we're going to explore relaxation. And this is something which I think can be so underrated, as well as frequently being presented as kind of being easy and whilst feeling impossible to achieve. So if anybody has ever said to you, just relax at a moment when you were feeling really stressed, anxious, or annoyed, and you possibly wanted to punch them, not that we're advocating violence, then we're really glad to have you here. And we hope that we can untangle this topic a little more and help you approach it in a less annoying and more effective way. So,
More effective than punching somebody in the face.
yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that. It doesn't help anybody's relaxation. So,
I don't know. It could. It can certainly be satisfying.
sometimes punching things may help, but do it in a way that won't damage you or another person.
I have a
Um,
teenage boy. Don't get me started.
get a proper punch bag if you're going to do that. Okay, so we digress already. Relaxation, I think the first thing that we really want to communicate about this is it really is a skill and not a personality trait. And whilst you probably have people in your life who seem to be able to be just like really good at it, and I'm guessing if you're listening to this, you may well be somebody who finds it quite difficult, um, or maybe sometimes finds it easy, but other times can find it really difficult or impossible. I think that's a really important thing to remember. This is not about some intrinsic, necessarily kind of inbuilt natural ability that just comes magically, and if you don't have it, that's it, you're stuffed. I think it is something we can learn, and like many things, the more we understand about it, the easier it will be to learn and get better at it. Um, and whilst in lots of ways it is something that's quite simple, that doesn't mean it's easy. And we're really rarely taught about it. In more recent years, I think there has been a real growth in stuff about meditation, yoga practices, things like that, that are more focused on relaxation. I keep feeling like I want to do quotation marks. For those of you watching the videos will see me, but for those of you listening won't know that. But it's like relaxation, because it's this concept that we all think, oh yeah, relaxation, that's easy. That's what you do in the evenings after you've finished work. But I think culturally, we've really confused it with rest, with collapse, with laziness, with tiredness, with sleepiness. All those things have got kind of all muddled up. Whereas relaxation can be kind of those things, but actually isn't really necessarily any of those things. And if we can start to think of it as more of a kind of active regulation process, not something that necessarily happens just by accident, I think it can help us to get better at it and find it easier to access when we need to. So, again, in this episode, we're really going to try and reframe it as foundational to what we talk about as energy intelligence, which is really just being more aware of your energy system and what you can do to include that part of yourself in your all your other kind of self-care and well-being practices. You really can't feel or regulate your energy if your nervous system is in a constant state of stress, but you also can't sleep very well. You can't eat properly. You can't do many things if your nervous system is in a state of stress.
Yeah, including not smacking people in the face. Yeah, I like what you say that it's not a personality trait. It's also
Yeah.
not an indictment of your morality or your goodness or badness as a person. But I think it goes both ways. I've heard people brag about their inability to relax as much as I've heard people
Mm.
brag about their ability to relax.
Yeah. That person is like, oh yeah, I never stop, and I was up till this
Mm-hmm.
time, and now I'm, and I got up really early, and now I'm doing all this stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
the kind of person that you tend to feel exhausted just listening to.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so The other thing I think that's so important about what you just said that we're going to teach people is that it's not the same thing as resting or collapsing or just being tired. It's actually possible and beneficial to be in active relaxation.
Hmm.
People may have heard of the flow state. That's a lovely thing when you're actively engaged in something, but your whole nervous system is, dare I overuse the word, relaxed. And your mind is also, dare I overuse the word again, relaxed. And you're producing something. Maybe you're felting, or maybe you're playing piano, or maybe you're just walking, but you're not shut down on your social media. You're not collapsed in on yourself, but you are actively engaged in something. And the reason why that's the case is because to be relaxed is really very much a nervous system state. And as a nervous system state, it does include all the things that you all keep hearing us talk about, which is the body, the mind, and the energy. And the nervous system has two ways of being. It can be in fight or flight, it can be in rest and digest. It can be activated in its sympathetic form, which is the go mode, or it can be turned off, which is the parasympathetic mode, which is the rest and digest. And that's where your stomach gurgles. Karen, I suspect you have the same experience that when clients get on the table, the massage table, that another opportunity for you to say massage. When they get on the massage table, their stomach starts to gurgle, and they often apologize. And I say to them, no, 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 this is fantastic. This is your nervous system moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic.
Yeah, I often say to people, this is a really common sound in this room. Yeah, and it's a good sign. It's a good sign when our belly starts to gurgle. It means our body basically has nothing better to do than keep moving anything that's hanging around in our digestive system through our digestive system. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So we know when we're relaxed because we know when we're not relaxed because we're going to have very familiar sensations of shallow breathing, maybe a mild headache. Our muscles are going to be activated unnecessarily. Our shoulders are going to be our new earrings. We are probably going to be ill. That's a great imitation of that for those that can see Karen. Um, we're going to have difficulty not just in our bodies, but also in our inability to receive help, our inability to be present, our sense that we're
Mm.
bracing, mild anxiety. So it's not just a body sensation, it's also a mind sensation. And we'll get into the energy part of it in a minute when we go over some of these basics. And signs that we're relaxed, your body is soft, your thoughts are not racing, your digestive system is actually working, and often you can hear it, and you can make decisions more easily.
Absolutely. And I think then we can also think about some parts of us that it might be harder for us to know in the moment are working well, like our hormones, our immune system, the inflammation in our bodies, tissue repair, those kind of things. They're not things we can necessarily notice in that exact moment. But like for example, we may heal quicker from a injury if we
Mm-hmm.
are able to be relaxed more of the time. But it's always hard to measure those things, I think. So perhaps, especially, I mean, maybe some things we could do blood tests, but there's so many variables that it's always really hard to know. But we do know, I mean, there's, huge amounts of research showing that being stressed makes all sorts of other things worse, harder, contributes to
Mm-hmm.
them. Um, yeah, so that's a big reason for our physical health. We also know for our mental health, it has a huge impact being stressed. But just our general well-being, I think, you may be somebody who doesn't have any particular specific medical issues or, any kind of major mental health issues, but we feel better when we're relaxed. And maybe that should be our biggest guide rather than getting too caught up in all the other stuff that stress causes, because then we can start to feel quite powerless, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, I'm making all these things worse. Whereas, okay, what can I do in this moment? What can I understand about how I best relax, how, what part of my system, my whole system, would be the best way to approach me feeling a bit more relaxed in this moment.
Do you think it's possible that sorry, I had about three thoughts in my head before I opened my mouth. That relaxation is actually a very old-fashioned word, and I think it's been replaced by regulation. I think people are no longer looking to feel relaxed. I think they're looking to feel regulated, but I do
Mm,
think it's kind of the same thing. And I think I suspect it comes out of the truth that there's this prize for not having to relax, for being able to go, go, go. And somehow searching to be regulated feels more worthy than searching to be relaxed.
mm. Which reminds me of I was reading something the other day about how, because we've become so sedentary in our modern lives, we miss out on a lot of the movement that we used to have in our normal lifestyle. So if we were farming, or when we were back when we were hunter gatherers, you know, for a huge chunk of our waking time, we would be moving, and some of that would be really active, more energetic movement, but there would be a lot of, just if you think about yourself cooking, or just doing a bit of tidying up around the house, or walking out to water the animals, or whatever it would have been, there's a kind of a rhythmic, gentle movement that's going on a lot of the time. And I would imagine that then when people did have those moments when they got to sit down and do what we might think of as more traditionally relaxation, is, whereas we perhaps like, oh, now I'm going to relax, like we would have just been more relaxed to start with. So we could sit there for 5 minutes and have something to drink or have some food, and notice the sound of our animals sounding content with their, as they're munching away on
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're eating. Or so it would have been more integrated, I think, into our lifestyle. Now it's almost become this thing we have to schedule in, which is kind of the, I don't know about you, but if I have in my calendar, right, time to relax, like this is
Relax
my
now.
half hour window in which I'm going to go and relax. It's like it's a specific activity, rather than what you were saying earlier about the nervous system. We can be engaged in something but have our nervous system be calm. And I think we can really learn a lot from animals about that, because animals are really, really good generally, if they're not, if they're reasonably content and not traumatized, and have most of their needs met most of the time, they they're not switched off in a kind of zoned out kind of way. They're just, right now, part of them might be scanning. If I need to pay attention, I will. But right now, I'm I'm actually okay. So I'm just gonna enjoy eating, or hanging out with my friends, or sunbathing, or whatever. Curling up by the fire, if I'm a dog with a good home, or and that way. And even when they're running around, some of that time their nervous system will still be quite calm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's, in addition to sort of a cultural identity and a personal identity that values busyness, I think it's worth just at least briefly mentioning the other reasons why it can be difficult to regulate, to relax, to allow things to calm down. And I think one of the biggest ones is that when that happens, emotions surface that we have been
Mm.
suppressing. And all of a sudden we can feel things that are uncomfortable, and we don't want to feel those things, and we don't want to have to think of those things. And if we've got our brains and our bodies overly busy in getting productivity and getting things done, then there's a bunch of stuff that we don't have to think about.
Yeah, I think the one about emotions is really important, because again, and I mean, this sort of circles back around to the cultural thing. I think we're not good in, I mean, certainly in your American culture and my British culture, neither of those cultures are brilliant at allowing people their full range of emotion. It's okay to feel angry about something that is happening that isn't good. It's okay to feel afraid when there's something happening that's scary. It's okay to feel, um, sad when something that makes us unhappy. But we spend so much time kind of squashing stuff down, and we can really easily get into a state where we can't relax because that stuff is going to bubble up. And that's the bit where I think it's worth saying, again, as we often do in our podcast, those parts of relaxation you may need some help with.
Mhm.
Actually, I just recalled one of the things, going back to what we were saying about working with our clients, one of the ways that I often talk about this with my clients is we can think about our nervous systems as being a bit like a television. So a television usually has a standby mode. So it's still plugged into the power supply, and at the press of a button, it's ready to come on and be active. But the rest of the time, it's just you often have like a little red light that tells you, well, it's on, but it's not kind of in action. And our nervous system ideally should be like that. It's like it's ready to respond if we need it for our survival, or there's something that we need to pay more attention to. But the rest of the time it can just kind of hang out and not need to be really engaged in anything.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really nice way of looking at it. Um, okay, so people have probably heard about things like breathing exercises and meditation and walking in nature and those things. And all of those things are very much oriented towards the mind and the body. And we, being who we are and who this podcast is, want to take a second and talk about the energetic side of that because that's often getting missed. And I also think some of the resistance to being able to relax comes from a legitimate inability in that moment to be able to breathe well or to find the time to go out into nature. And I think if you can understand that there's a third piece to this, as always, we are this three-legged stool of being a human, of a mind, body, and energy. Being able to access and understand the energetic side of that can make a massive difference to the success of being able to relax. And one of the most important ways that Karen and I were thinking about that is what people call co-regulating. And co-regulating is really, think about it in terms of water flows downhill, right? People morph towards, move towards, shift towards the more stable energetic system in the room. And in terms of, I think most people think about it in terms of parents and children. If you're soothing a fussy baby and the mother's tone of voice and how she touches the child and all these ways that she can have the baby relax, people are beginning to understand that what's going on there is that that baby's nervous system is co-regulating to the mother's nervous system or the father's nervous system or the fabulous auntie's nervous system that's picked up the baby so the mother can go shower. And we call that co-regulation. But what people really aren't thinking about it is how that mechanism is working. The NIH, National Institute of Health here in America, says co-regulation works by tapping into biological and behavioral levels, primarily through the nervous system interaction, which tells us absolutely nothing. And it also doesn't really... right? Like I can say that again, and I still don't know that I'll understand what it means. And the NIH is actually a pretty balanced scientific organization. It's incredibly mainstream, but they are also open to alternative work as long as it's evidence-based, as they should be. But in that is no recognition that the mechanism that nervous system is touching each other. It's not nerve to nerve, thank goodness, because that would be appalling. It's actually through the energetic stream between the mother and the child.
Yeah, because this has often kind of made my head go a bit like scrambled, because how is that actually transmitting? As you know, I do a lot of work with horses, and we often talk about being, a horse has a massive big nervous system. And again, assuming they're calm and happy, often people will talk about when I just go stand next to a horse, I immediately feel more relaxed. But you could do that without touching a horse. Sometimes you can do it just by looking at them from a distance, like you're not necessarily even standing right next to them. So how is that working? And maybe, and this whole sort of recent drive about, nature-based therapies and getting the benefits of being out in nature more, is it possible that we can also do some form of this co-regulation with a tree, for example? Now, whilst a tree is alive, I'm not necessarily, obviously doesn't have a nervous system like a mammal's. So how is that? What is happening there? What is working? What sort of process is happening? And how is that connecting between those two living things without necessarily physical touch? Although arguably physical touch may, probably does make it easier. Like when a friend puts a hand on our shoulder or gives us a hug, sometimes when we're really upset, that can work better to help us calm down than someone who's sitting across from us and being sympathetic. But still, even with the physical touch, I mean, I guess our nerve endings are kind of might be making some contact through our skin. But for us as energy healers, that leaves the really interesting question of how is the transmission kind of occurring? And it makes absolute sense that that's happening through our energy system. Just in case you haven't caught our episodes about the aura, we all have an energy field that extends beyond our physical body. And when we stand near somebody, our auras can come into contact kind of before our physical body comes into contact. So it's likely that is also supporting this kind of what we're calling now co-regulation, that then helps our nervous system become more like the nervous system of the calm person or being.
Yeah, I think that once we can accept that the relaxation experience that's happening through co-regulation is showing up in measurable ways in the nervous system through heart rate and blood pressure. But the way that that's happening is actually through the energy flow between the two, the horse, the person, the two people, whatever it is. Once you can accept and understand that, then I think that's when we can start talking about, how do I use that information? How does that increase in my energy intelligence help me relax more?
Mm-hmm.
Because now I can take that information and I understand why going out into nature is relaxing. Am I co-regulating to the forest? Am I co-regulating to the tree? Is my relaxation state happening because I'm allowing my energy to flow with the energy around me? And the energy around me right now is much more clean and stable and connected to good things than I am because I've been in an office cubicle all day. And so I think that's a real example of what we're trying to get at in this podcast, which is the more we can break down where the energetics are going on in our lives, the more we can increase our energy intelligence, the more we can apply it to be more effective at these things that we're trying to do. In this case, actually relax without actually relax.
Yeah, and I think that's where we keep circling round, because those of you who've listened to other episodes will know that we often talk about how humans are essentially made up of three parts. We have a physical body, we have a mind, and we have an energy system. We also then have emotions that kind of sit somewhere between, in amongst all of that. And it's very much like the medical profession, separates out the physical body into all these different parts, our circulatory system, our skeleton, etc., etc. It can be helpful to a point by separating out those different parts of us, but it's also really important that we remind ourselves then that actually all those parts are interconnected. And one of the things that can make talking about energy awareness, energy intelligence tricky is that we tend to experience energy through our physical body. Maybe a little bit through kind of images appearing in our mind sometimes, depending on how your particular brain works. But that's how we experience energy, and that's how the energy part of us and the physical body part of us are so intertwined that we can, to a degree, separate them out to explain stuff. But it's also they are very interconnected, and our energy system and also interdependent interdependent, because our energy system will be in better balance if our physiological body, if you like, is relaxed. But equally, it can be hard for our body to relax if our energy system is out of whack, which I think is where, or if our mind is in full on overthinking mode. And that's where I think this understanding gives us a better way of thinking about, okay, where's my way in right now to help me relax more? So do I need techniques that primarily focus on my mind? Do I need techniques that focus primarily on my energy system? Do I need techniques that are more physical, that are more about my body?
Yeah, I think you remind me of something that happened last night, actually. To me, was I increased weights in my kettlebell experience and
Hmm.
waving kettlebells around, and I hurt myself. I had pain later that night, and my husband turned to me and he said, "Is it muscular or is it tendon, like ligament tendon or muscular?" And you make me think about that because I knew exactly what and why he was asking that. Because if I've strained a muscle, that's has a different kind of injury, different kind of prognosis. Have I strained ligaments? Have I, uh, um, strained a ligament or a tendon? That's a different kind of thing. And obviously bone as well, although the conversation would have been far more urgent had it been bone. But the point is, I had pain and I needed to be able to understand what was causing that pain. The pain was in my shoulder, but that doesn't mean that all of that pain was coming from the same place. And understanding that then led me to be able to figure out what to do next and figure out what the next few days / few weeks would look like for me. And I think what you're saying is part of that, right? Like we're going to experience it in the same way, right? Pain is pain. We're going to experience things through our bodies and our mind / emotions, but where is it coming from and why has a massive impact on how we handle it and what we do next.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, before we move on to the bit about, well, then what do I do about it? Because that's a great example, because that whether what's causing that pain informs what you do about it, which is, I think, exactly what we're talking about with the relaxation and stuff. So if my nervous system is not regulated, if my body is not relaxed, if if I feel tense, um, what do I do first? But I'm just wondering if there's anything before we move into that kind of a little bit more explanation about what are techniques we can use for each of those things and how do they also overlap? Is there anything else we want to cover about relaxation or
Well, I think
nervous
it's important
systems?
to say explicitly that people are pretty informed about how being stressed and all the hormones that come into the body with stress, the cortisol, the adrenaline, how that has medium and long-term impact on the body in terms of our health, right? World Health Organization, I think stress is related to 70% of all illnesses, which is a phenomenal number. But I think it's worth just explicitly pointing out that this is true for the energy anatomy as well. If people are interested in increasing their intuition, if people are interested in having more of an internal compass about how they feel, what they want to do, and what the world is communicating to them through their intuition, it is very hard to do that if your system is stressed.
Hmm.
Everything constricts. The cardiovascular system constricts, but so does the intuitive system. So there's a kind of falling into yourself that happens when we're stressed, that learning to relax and undo that allows not just the blood to flow better, but also the chi to flow better through the meridian lines, the intuition to flow better into the chakras to flow better.
Hmm.
All of those things have an impact on the energy anatomy just as much as it does on the physical anatomy.
And I think whichever technique you choose, I mean, don't overthink it, because any one thing you can do is likely to have an impact on eventually on all the parts of you. It's just that some might target first one particular aspect. So to give you an example, I mean, something like meditation, which is commonly kind of put forward as a useful strategy or a useful tool for meditation, for relaxation. Meditation can be done in a number of different ways, but it is often primarily a mental exercise. Now, it may include some more body-based stuff, like some breathing or some just like focusing on sinking down into your body. Can you release some tension? Can you, that kind of approach. But primarily, it is a mental exercise. And it can be really, really useful for that. It can help us to get our mind quieter, and enable us then to be able to drop down into our body. We may find if we can get a little bit more focus to our mind that our breathing naturally slows down. And
Mm-hmm.
also, we may or may not be aware of it, but our aura might expand out a little bit and be able to, to find it easier just to release daily stuff that might be in our energy system. Um, the chakras are energy centers that essentially spin, and they may be able to find a more comfortable axis or a better speed, um, as your mind kind of quietens down. So doing any one thing is likely to have a knock-on effect for the others. So, start somewhere. Do one thing.
Start somewhere. Well,
Yeah.
and then know that it doesn't really matter where you start, as you say, because starting it's a cumulative effect. Start someplace
Mm.
and you'll get where you'll get wherever you want to go. It doesn't matter where you start.
Mhm. And I think something like, so being out in nature, just to help illustrate some of our points about how these parts are, so interdependent, interconnected. Being out in nature, usually when we do that, we have some movement in order to get to the nature. So we may have driven in a car to get there, but then we get out the car and maybe we walk a short distance. So there will be at least some kind of physical movement. Maybe even we just stand for a minute. There's a certain amount of physical kind of thing going on, if you like, even if we're not moving a lot, which might be very different to, you could go out for a run in nature, which may feel less relaxing, although I think you can arguably run in a more or less relaxed, perhaps not if you're running a race, but in a more or less relaxed manner. But once you're out in that nature, there are lots of things you can do. So just by paying a bit more attention to the sounds around you or the smell of the air as you breathe in, they're kind of, in part, you're using your mind to do those things, to pay attention to a particular thing. You're also, again, using your body a little bit. So your breathing, again, might change. By listening, we tend to move ourselves more into our body anyway. Our vision tends to keep us more focused on our mind, whereas our hearing tends to bring us more into our bodies. But being in the energy of that place will impact our energy system. And as we walk around, the different energies of the earth underneath us that is perhaps less impacted by human-made things, like walking on a woodland floor is a different energy vibration to walking on a concrete road. So we're shifting the energy of where we are, which will have an impact on our energy system. If we go and stand right underneath a huge, great oak tree or redwood tree, the energy of that tree, scientists will agree that a tree, although perhaps they may not agree that a tree has consciousness as such, they'll agree that a tree has an energy field. So that brings us into the energy field that's different, that will then impact our energy system.
The urbanite in me wants to talk about living in a city because although I live in a
Mm.
sleepy ocean town now and you live out in the middle of absolute cowland, um, I've spent most of my time in big cities and you can't just walk outside and go in nature. When somebody says to you, go walk in nature, if you're living in New York, that can often feel a little bit like somebody as irritating as somebody telling you to relax. You can't always get over to Central Park. But I will say that even in the biggest of cities, you can walk down the street and usually find a tree every once in a while that's living
Mhm.
out of the sidewalk. And just in that way that we can change the emphasis from what we're looking at visually to what we're hearing, we can change our awareness of, are we connecting to the energy of the tree as we walk towards it, stand near it, and then walk past it. And you can do that tree by tree as you're going down the street. But even if there isn't that, I often found when I was living in big cities, looking up did a
Mm.
similar kind of thing, right? You can walk down you can walk down any kind of avenue and look at the gargoyles on the big Gothic buildings as you're walking past them, right? Or the architecture, because you just don't see those things normally.
Yeah,
London's a great place to do that too.
I was thinking exactly the same thing because when I first moved out of London to the country, to a more rural area, I was really struck by how short my line of
Mm.
focus is in the city because you don't have to look very far and you're bouncing off the next building or car or person or whatever. Um, but actually making that conscious attempt to look upwards or, sitting or even laying on the ground, or just looking out your
Okay, now
window.
I have an image of us laying on the grounds in the middle of London, looking up at the sky. Perhaps we should not start suggesting that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, London as a city actually has loads of parks and quite a lot of,
That's true.
pocket little tiny pockets of green space. So you often see people, when on the random days that it is sunny and not raining, everybody rushes outside and will lay in the parks. But what I was going to say is even just looking out your window, you know, at
Mm.
a little, and even if it's a tiny square of sky. What that also does, I think, is our bodies, even if we can't get out in that nature, in that, be in that natural environment, our bodies have generally had the experience of that. So sometimes by just tuning into that, and to a degree, you can even do this by picturing it in your head, with a little bit of practice, we can almost take ourselves there. Now, the actual energy vibration, going in immersing yourself in it by standing in nature is obviously going to be different to trying to just imagine that, or looking at a little square of blue sky out your window, or grey sky if you live in England, um, out your window. It may not have quite the same impact, but it can still help to cause shifts in our energy system
Hmm.
through those memories, or by just connecting a little bit, even if we're not doing that in a very conscious way, using our mind to help us connect to the energy of the natural world that does feel a bit different to the concrete and noise of the big city.
Yeah, you're talking explicitly about swapping the technique of exposing your energy to other energies and allowing your energy to change more towards the more naturally balanced energy, which then I guess is what we've been calling co-regulation. I was trying to find a different way to call it, but you're talking about the difference between going out and co-regulating to energy that's more stable than yours, more clean than yours, versus changing your own energy through the mind. So in the way that
Mhm.
the mind can tell your toe to wiggle, the mind can focus on something like what it feels like to be in a field or feels like to be at the beach, and then that will tell your energy field what you want it to morph into directly. And those are just two different techniques. Does that mean that
Yeah,
we've moved into giving people techniques?
I think we have.
I
I
think
think
we
that's
have.
good because I think we want to give people something to really take away. The you also remind me, clients often say to me that they just recall how they feel when they're laying on the couch when they've had some
Mm.
energy healing. So again, it's not accessible to everybody, but if you can find someone, even just something as simple as a half an hour Reiki session with, the local
Mm-hmm.
practitioner down the street, that, doesn't necessarily matter if they can't do the more complicated energy healing, but just having another calm person put some Reiki energy into your body. Reiki's great for helping the body and the energy system relax. Um, it can, it's like it helps your nervous system recall more clearly there's that state of standby, that state of nice and calm and ready to respond, but not currently activated. Um, and the more we give ourselves experiences of that by seeking help from other people if we need it, if we're struggling to do it for ourselves, the easier I think it then becomes to help you get yourself back into that state. So if
Hmm.
right now you're really, really struggling, try some of the things we're talking about. By all means, try some meditation, but maybe a bit more body based. Try some deep breathing, go stand out by a tree if you can, or just look at a piece of blue sky. But if you can be around some people that can help your nervous system to calm, and help your energy system then start to naturally rebalance itself, um, it will be easier for you to get back to refine that state when you're feeling stressed, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, other quickly, some really specific things that for people to try out. Exhaling for longer than you inhale is an immediate signal to your body to relax. So if you inhale to the count of 4, exhale to 6, exhale to 8, that will immediately uh, put you from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Not immediately, after, I don't know, 4 or 5 breaths. It'll move you into rest and digest. Taking transitions, I can sometimes find myself parking as far away from the front door as I possibly can, maybe even a few blocks, so that I am forced to walk 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and just consciously taking that time to look around, and
Mm.
take a moment where I'm not doing anything. There's an orientating exercise, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that people often use when they're in a panic attack state, that can also help just for general relaxation, right? So looking around the room, identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can taste, and 2 things you can hear and 1 thing you can taste. That's actually really orients people to here and now so that it can help your mind relax.
I think you missed out smell.
Did I?
Um,
Oh,
yeah,
two is smell.
yeah,
See, hear, touch, smell, taste.
yeah, yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. And I think things that you can do that more specifically sort of affect your energy system, a really, really great simple one that is, really easy for people to access, is using smoke. So burning some sage, some other herbs, some incense. Um, that can help to change the vibration of a room, the energy vibration of a room, making it easier and nicer to be in. Um, Actually, wafting the smoke around your body can help to clean your energy, the energy part of you. So that can be yeah, burning some incense, something like that can be really helpful. And sound vibration can really change the energy, although it's a kind of, in a way, it's a sort of more physical thing. It's, all these things there is that, they have more overlap with the energy, I think. The
Mm-hmm.
smoke and the sound, I don't know about in America, but over in the UK, there's been a massive increase in sound baths like gongs and various other types of music to use that vibration. We can feel the vibration of music. People who are deaf sometimes still really get something from music because they can feel the vibration of it, and that find that beneficial, and that works, both with our physical body, but it also impacts the energy, can completely change the feel of a room by making certain sounds. And if you are that way inclined, if you want to get your own singing bowl or drum or something like, or gong or something like that, and you want to actually make that sound yourself, great. If you want to go to a class where they offer that, great. But also just listen to something, which will play it loud for a minute if you can. Music, I think, can really change the way we feel. So that can be
Mm-hmm.
a something which, again, to a degree, will work on all those 3 parts of us.
Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite ones is, um, and it's partly my favorite because it takes such a short amount of time to do it, is just to sit down, including sitting down on the toilet, if that's where you happen to spend a regular amount of your time. You know, we, especially as women, we tend to pee every hour, right? Sit down and take 30 seconds and feel any muscles that you might be using that are unnecessary. So are
Mhm.
your shoulders up to your ears? Can you allow them to slide down your back? Are you clenching your jaw? You know, again, sitting in that position requires a certain number of muscles, but not all of them. And are there any that you can turn off? And just that will do it. But I think the most important thing that we can support people to be able to do this, again, increase your energy intelligence, understand which parts of you are being effective. Are you accessing your nervous system through your something physical like breathing, something energetic like saging, or something mental like meditation? But above all, value being relaxed and regulated, because there are many things in this culture that are trying very hard to get you not to value it. And so just by making a commitment to knowing that not only is this good for you, but it's good for everybody around you, and it's the best way forward, will go a long way to making that happen for you.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a good place to end because I think it's acknowledging, when you notice yourself getting more stressed and dysregulated, um, it might be something you're doing directly or not doing, but it also just may be something in your environment. And as much as with co-regulation, people talk about like with the baby hopefully has calm, relaxed parents, enough of the time that no pressure on parents, that the baby's energy system can regulate to that bigger, calmer nervous system. There are a lot of things in the world that will be pulling us in the other direction. And many
Mm-hmm.
of those things we have no control over. And that can feel a little bit scary or a bit overwhelming sometimes. But that's where it's really important to, well, what are the things I, can do? What are the small, can I take a few extra breaths? Can I light some incense? Can I go and just step outside my door and breathe air? Can I look at the sky for a couple of minutes? Can I, as Tiffany described, like tune into gravity and remember that, my feet can be on the ground and, those
Mm-hmm.
things which will all help support our nervous system, support our mind, and support our energy system.
Excellent. All right, guys, thanks for hanging with us. If you'd like journal prompts or some energy experiments to try at home, come become a member at patreon.com, and you'll get some of those for every episode. And practice it. Let us know if you have questions. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.